It started with whispers across the neatly trimmed lawns of Maplewood Estates, the kind of community where every hedge was sculpted to perfection and every driveway gleamed after the morning wash. The HOA called it a peaceful paradise. Though anyone who had lived there long enough knew peace came only when everyone stayed in their lane, especially if Karen Benson was watching. Karen had appointed herself the unofficial enforcer of neighborhood perfection long before the HOA board even existed. She was the sort who carried a clipboard more faithfully than her own purse, inspecting lawns, counting trash bins, and measuring fence heights with a ruler she kept in her tote. To her, Maplewood wasn't just a neighborhood. It was her kingdom, and she guarded it like a hawk. Then came the day when a moving truck rolled into the cul-de-sac at 6 a.m. on a bright Tuesday morning. The neighbors peeked through their blinds, curious about who would dare move into Lot 18, the property that had been empty for nearly 2 years. The new homeowner was a man named Daniel, a quiet wildlife photographer who had spent most of his life in Africa. He had inherited the property from his late aunt and decided to make it his base between assignments. At first, there was nothing unusual about Daniel. He was polite, kept his yard tidy, and waved when he saw people walking their dogs. But a week after he moved in, something extraordinary arrived in the back of a massive transport truck. The neighbors gathered in confusion as the gates opened, revealing a sight none of them could have imagined. A fully grown elephant stepping carefully onto the driveway. The ground trembled softly beneath its feet, and for a moment no one moved. The elephant's gray skin glistened under the morning sun, its eyes calm and intelligent. Daniel walked beside it as if nothing were out of place. He guided the animal through a reinforced gate he'd built in the backyard, where a large enclosure waited, a private sanctuary. He later explained, for an elephant named Tara, rescued from a shuttered wildlife park. By noon, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. Some were amazed, others horrified. And of course, Karen Benson was absolutely livid. Karen's kitchen window faced Daniel's property, giving her a clear view of the enclosure. The sight of that enormous creature grazing peacefully behind a fence sent her into a frenzy. She fired off a string of emails to the HOA board demanding immediate action against the blatant violation of community rules. She called animal control, the city inspector, and even the local news. But the elephant wasn't illegal. Daniel had obtained every permit, had built the enclosure to code, and even installed a drainage system that exceeded environmental standards. This infuriated Karen even more. Over the next few days, she began her own campaign. She told neighbors the elephant was dangerous, that it could break free and destroy property. She claimed the smell was unbearable, though there was none. She started a petition titled "Protect Maplewood from Wild Animals" and went door to door gathering signatures, glaring at anyone who refused to sign. Meanwhile, Tara the elephant became something of a local attraction. Children would stop by the fence to watch her bathe herself with the hose Daniel installed, or to see her gently sway as she played with large rubber balls in the yard. Daniel made sure she was never disturbed, always keeping a respectful distance between the enclosure and the street. Karen, however, saw none of the beauty. To her, Tara was a symbol of defiance, a living, breathing reminder that someone dared to challenge her authority. Every morning, Karen watched through her binoculars, waiting for any reason to complain. She documented every noise, every movement, every supposed infraction. But Daniel was careful, meticulous even, giving her nothing to use. This only deepened her obsession. Then came the day when she couldn't take it anymore. It was a Saturday morning, humid and restless. Karen had spent the previous night writing another formal complaint to the HOA, and her frustration had reached a breaking point. She stood at her window, glaring at the elephant peacefully flicking its tail in the yard. Tara was standing close to the fence, munching on a pile of fresh hay. Daniel wasn't home. He had gone to the farmer's market, leaving a sign on his gate that read, "Please do not disturb. Wildlife care in progress." That was all the invitation Karen needed. She stormed across her lawn, clutching her phone in one hand and a printed copy of the HOA bylaws in the other. She muttered to herself as she walked, rehearsing the speech she planned to give him later about public safety and neighborhood integrity. When she reached the fence, she scowled up at the towering creature on the other side. Tara lifted her head slightly, sensing movement. Her ears flapped lazily as she watched Karen with calm curiosity. But Karen didn't stop to consider that she was standing mere feet from one of the world's most powerful animals. She stepped closer, inspecting the fence as if searching for a flaw. Then, in an act of reckless arrogance, she reached out and smacked the metal panel with her hand. The sound echoed through the yard. Tara took a step back, startled, and let out a deep rumbling noise that vibrated through the air. Karen jumped but refused to back down. She began shouting, though there was no one there to hear her, about property lines, HOA codes, and wild beasts invading her peace. Her voice rose, shrill and furious. She pounded the fence again as if trying to prove a point to herself. Tara, confused and frightened, took another step back, her large eyes fixed on the agitated human. Then, slowly, the elephant raised her trunk, curling it in uncertainty. That's when Karen made the mistake that would define her for years to come. She stepped onto Daniel's side of the property line, pushing against the fence to see if it would give way. The metal creaked but held firm. In her mind, she believed she was inspecting the enclosure for violations. But to the elephant, it looked like aggression. Tara's instincts kicked in. She trumpeted loudly, a deep, echoing sound that rippled across the neighborhood. Karen stumbled back, startled by the noise. But before she could retreat, the elephant moved forward, not in rage, but in a defensive reflex, pressing her massive forehead gently against the fence. The impact was enough to send Karen sprawling backward, tumbling over her flower bed and landing squarely in her own yard, covered in dirt and disbelief. The neighborhood fell silent. From behind curtains and porches, dozens of eyes had witnessed the scene. Karen lay there, clutching her phone, her pride shattered. And behind the fence, Tara stood quietly again, her ears twitching as if nothing had happened. By the time Daniel returned home, the story had already spread like wildfire through Maplewood Estates. The HOA group chat was flooded with messages. Some called it an accident. Others called it karma. Karen, however, was already planning her next move. Because in her mind, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. By the next morning, Maplewood Estates was alive with gossip. Everyone had heard a different version of the story. Some said the elephant had attacked Karen. Others claimed she had trespassed and spooked it first. A few of the more reasonable neighbors tried to stay neutral, but neutrality was a dangerous position when Karen was involved. She emerged from her house that Sunday morning like a general preparing for battle. Her flower bed was still damaged from her fall, her knees scraped, and her pride bruised beyond repair. But none of that mattered. In her mind, she had been assaulted on her own property, and she was determined to make someone pay for it. Karen's first step was documentation. She spent hours taking pictures of her lawn, the broken fence post she claimed the elephant had damaged, and the faint mud streaks where she'd fallen. Then she printed everything, neatly labeling each page in a binder marked Incident Report, Elephant Attack. She planned to present it to the HOA, City Animal Control, and anyone else who would listen. By noon, the entire neighborhood knew that a formal investigation was underway, though no actual authority had agreed to conduct one. Karen, however, had declared herself the victim of gross negligence and emotional distress. She even hinted at hiring a lawyer, though she had yet to call one. Meanwhile, Daniel was quiet. He had returned home the previous evening to find Karen's flattened flowers and a handful of angry emails waiting in his inbox. Instead of responding, he simply checked on Tara, who was calm, healthy, and unbothered by the chaos she had unintentionally caused. Daniel suspected the situation would escalate, but he didn't realize just how far Karen was willing to go. The next day, Karen marched into the HOA office with her binder in hand. She demanded an emergency meeting. The board members, 3 retirees and 1 part-time accountant, looked uneasy. They knew Karen well. They had been on the receiving end of her tirades before, whether it was about unapproved garden gnomes or garbage cans left out too long. Still, they scheduled the meeting, hoping to placate her. That Thursday evening, residents gathered in the community center for what would become one of the most talked-about HOA meetings in Maplewood history. Karen stood at the front of the room, binder open, voice trembling with righteous indignation. She described in painstaking detail how she had been viciously shoved by the elephant and how she feared for the safety of every child in the neighborhood. She spoke of massive fecal odors and potential disease risks, painting a vivid picture of danger and decay. But not everyone was convinced. Several neighbors who had witnessed the incident quietly murmured among themselves. They remembered how Karen had approached the fence, how she had struck it first, and how the elephant's reaction had seemed more startled than aggressive. When Karen finished her speech, one of the board members asked if anyone else wanted to comment. A few hands went up cautiously at first. A young mother mentioned that her children loved watching the elephant, and that it seemed gentle and well cared for. Another resident said he appreciated how Daniel had reinforced the fence and never let anyone get too close. Karen's face flushed with anger. To her, every word of support for Daniel was an act of betrayal. She glared at each speaker, her jaw tight. The board promised to review the situation, but they made no immediate ruling. Karen left the meeting fuming. In her mind, the board was corrupt, the neighbors were blind, and Daniel was manipulating everyone with his calm demeanor. That night, she began her next plan, a neighborhood-wide smear campaign. She designed flyers titled "Danger in Maplewood, the Truth About the Elephant," and printed hundreds of copies. Each one contained dramatic photos of the animal, quotes from outdated safety reports about elephants, and a sensational headline claiming, "Your child could be next." At sunrise, she slipped them into mailboxes, taped them to lampposts, and even left a few on Daniel's gate. By the afternoon, the HOA group chat was in chaos again. Some residents were outraged at her tactics, while others began to worry. What if she was right? What if the elephant was a risk? The tension in the neighborhood grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Daniel tried to stay calm. He reached out to the board privately, providing them with documentation of his permits, veterinary reports, and safety certifications. He even invited them to inspect the enclosure, hoping transparency would defuse the hostility. When the inspectors arrived, they were impressed. The structure was secure, the drainage system clean, and the animal healthy. They found no violations. The official report cleared Daniel completely. Karen refused to accept it. She accused the inspectors of being bribed, the HOA of being biased, and Daniel of orchestrating a PR stunt. She even tried to contact local news stations again, though most didn't take her calls seriously after learning she was the same woman who once filed a noise complaint about a frog croaking too loudly at night. Still, she was relentless. She began recording videos from her backyard, documenting every moment the elephant moved. She narrated each clip in an overly dramatic tone, insisting it was proof of aggression. She uploaded them to social media hoping to expose Daniel. Instead, the videos went viral for a very different reason. People online found them hilarious. The comments filled with jokes about the woman who picked a fight with an elephant. Some even dubbed the video Karen versus nature. Memes spread, and before long, Karen's reputation extended far beyond Maplewood Estates. But Karen didn't laugh. She saw the online ridicule as part of Daniel's supposed revenge. Her frustration turned to obsession. She stopped sleeping properly, pacing her house at night, glaring through her blinds at the faint silhouette of the elephant under the yard lights. Then one night during a heavy storm, she saw something that reignited her crusade. A tree branch fell near Daniel's property, bending a section of the outer fence slightly inward. It wasn't broken, but to Karen it was an opportunity. She grabbed her phone and started recording again, narrating that the fence was failing and that the elephant was sure to escape. She called the HOA emergency line, animal control, and even the local sheriff's office, reporting an imminent threat. Within half an hour, flashing lights illuminated the cul-de-sac as officers arrived, only to find Daniel calmly repairing the minor damage while Tara slept peacefully under her shelter. The officers inspected, spoke briefly with Daniel, and left, clearly irritated at the false alarm. From her window, Karen watched them go, her anger boiling. To her, they were all useless, blind to the danger she alone could see. And so, as the rain continued to pour, she made a decision that would change everything. If no one else would stop that elephant, she would do it herself. The storm had passed by morning, leaving Maplewood Estates washed clean. The air smelled of wet grass and damp pavement. Most residents were still asleep when Karen Benson stepped out into her backyard, her raincoat clutched tightly around her shoulders, her mind fixed on one thought. The elephant had to go. Her sleepless night had been a blur of angry pacing and muttered justifications. She convinced herself that she wasn't doing anything wrong, that she was protecting the neighborhood from a disaster waiting to happen. The HOA wouldn't act, the authorities wouldn't listen, and Daniel had made her a laughingstock. So now she told herself it was up to her. Karen's plan was simple, in her mind at least. If she could prove the elephant's enclosure was unsafe, the city would have no choice but to remove it. She didn't intend to harm the animal, she told herself that repeatedly, but her definition of harm was flexible when it came to getting her way. The fence, she thought, was the key. If she could weaken a section of it just enough, she could later claim it had been faulty all along. Then, when the elephant inevitably pushed against it, it would bend or shift, and she'd have her evidence. That was the story she rehearsed as she gathered her tools: a wrench, a hammer, and a pair of wire cutters. The sun rose pale and thin over the wet roofs as she crept across her lawn toward Daniel's property. Her heart pounded with every step, but she pressed on, driven by the twisted satisfaction of finally taking control. She reached the side of the fence near the back corner, where the ground was soft from the rain, and the fence post leaned slightly from the fallen branch the night before. She glanced around. The street was empty. No one was watching. Karen crouched and began loosening the bolts that held one of the lower panels in place. The metal squealed softly, but she didn't stop. Her fingers trembled, both from fear and adrenaline. The plan was working, or so she thought. Inside the enclosure, Tara the elephant stirred. The soft clink of metal had woken her. She lifted her trunk, sniffing the air. The scent was unfamiliar but not alarming, not yet. She moved slowly toward the sound, her large feet pressing into the damp soil. Karen froze when she saw the movement. The silhouette of the elephant rose out of the shadows, massive and silent, her eyes glinting faintly in the morning light. For a moment, the two simply stared at each other through the fence, one filled with righteous delusion, the other with quiet confusion. Karen's breathing quickened. She convinced herself that the elephant recognized her, that it knew she was the one trying to expose it. That only fueled her resolve. She reached for the next bolt. But this time, the sound was louder. The metallic clank startled Tara, who stepped closer, curious. Her trunk brushed against the fence, nudging the loose panel Karen had been working on. The panel shifted slightly, making a low groan. Karen panicked. She stumbled backward, dropping her wrench into the wet grass. Her shoes slipped in the mud and she caught herself on the fence, gripping the very panel she'd just loosened. The metal gave way. The section of the fence swung outward just enough to startle the elephant further. Tara trumpeted, a deep echoing sound that shattered the morning stillness. Birds scattered from nearby trees. The noise was enough to wake half the neighborhood. Karen screamed, not from injury, but from fear. She fell backward again, splashing into a puddle, her raincoat smeared with mud. The elephant stepped forward, not aggressively, but in confusion. Her trunk swayed as she investigated the opening, unsure what had just happened. Karen scrambled to her feet, soaked and terrified. She turned to run, but the muddy ground betrayed her again. She slipped, slid down the small slope that separated her yard from Daniel's, and landed hard against her own fence. Her heart raced as she looked up at the massive animal now standing just feet away, framed by the opening she had created. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped moving. Tara stood silently, her ears flapping, her trunk curling toward the ground. She wasn't attacking, she was simply looking. Her calmness only made Karen's panic worse. The woman screamed again, a shrill sound that drew neighbors to their windows and doorsteps. Daniel, who had been preparing breakfast inside, heard the noise and ran outside barefoot. When he saw the broken panel, his heart dropped. He rushed toward the fence, calling softly to the elephant. Tara turned toward his voice, her body relaxing as she recognized him. Slowly, she stepped back into the enclosure. Daniel quickly slid the panel back into place and secured it with temporary clamps. The situation was under control within minutes. The elephant was safe. No one was hurt. But Karen didn't see it that way. She stood on her lawn, trembling, her hair plastered to her forehead, her clothes soaked and filthy. Neighbors gathered at a distance, whispering as they watched. Some recorded on their phones. Others shook their heads. To them, it was clear what had happened. To Karen, it was humiliation all over again. She shouted accusations across the yard, though her voice was cracked and hoarse. She claimed Daniel had trained the elephant to attack her. She said he had built a dangerous enclosure and that she had barely escaped alive. No one believed her. Animal control arrived soon after, responding to the flood of calls from concerned residents. They inspected the fence again and found clear signs of tampering, fresh tool marks, loosened bolts, and footprints matching Karen's shoes in the mud near the base. The report was blunt. Human interference had caused the incident. When the officer approached Karen with the findings, she tried to deny it, but her voice wavered. Her story changed several times before she finally fell silent. The crowd watched in uneasy silence as she was given a citation for trespassing and property damage. Daniel didn't press further. He stood quietly beside the elephant, who was now calmly eating hay again as if nothing had happened. He didn't look angry, just tired. He knew that for Karen, public embarrassment was a punishment worse than any fine. That night, Maplewood Estates was quieter than it had been in weeks. The group chats went still. The neighbors avoided gossip for once, though everyone was thinking the same thing. Karen had gone too far. But inside her house, the story was different. Karen sat at her dining table surrounded by crumpled papers and unopened mail. Her computer screen still displayed the paused footage from her backyard camera, the video of the morning's chaos. She replayed it again and again, searching for any frame that might make her look like the victim. And then she saw it, the brief moment when the elephant had stepped toward her, its trunk extended. To her, that was enough. A fraction of a second that could be twisted into evidence. She smiled faintly, her eyes cold with determination. The world might not believe her now, but she would make them. Because in her mind, this wasn't over yet. Not until she destroyed both Daniel's peace and the elephant's place in Maplewood for good. The citation changed everything, but it did not end the war. Karen's citation was the first crack in her armor, a public mark that contradicted the narrative she had spent weeks constructing. It was a small piece of paper to most, but in Maplewood Estates it became the opening salvo in a legal and social battle that would draw in lawyers, cameras, and strangers from across the internet. Karen reacted the only way she knew how. She amplified. She posted the footage she had edited into dramatic montages. She wrote long posts full of capitalized warnings and urgent pleas, and she contacted anyone who might add weight to her version. The posts achieved their purpose. They attracted attention, and with attention came opinions. The neighborhood split into factions, those who wanted to protect Daniel and Tara, and those who believed Karen had been unfairly treated. Neutral ground vanished quickly. Daniel, who had spent his life observing animals rather than people, found himself thrust into unwanted public scrutiny. He answered the inquiries the way he understood best, through documentation and calm actions. He shared veterinary reports, permit paperwork, and detailed logs of Tara's care. He invited independent animal welfare experts to inspect the enclosure. He took extra safety measures to ensure there would be no repeat of the morning the fence swung outward. All his efforts were pragmatic and meticulous. They also helped. The experts confirmed that Tara was well cared for, and community sentiment slowly shifted back toward the reality most residents had seen. That the elephant had not been aggressive, and that human interference had caused the danger. The HOA, shaken by media attention and legal threats, convened emergency sessions to rewrite guidelines and close loopholes. The board wanted to avoid appearing to favor either side, while protecting the neighborhood from future liability. They drafted new rules about exotic animal permits, buffer zones, and neighbor notification procedures. Those rules were precise, with clauses about inspections and insurance and fines. They read like a legal bulwark meant to prevent another saga from unfolding on manicured lawns. In court, the situation became a series of procedural motions and formal filings. Karen filed complaints and petitions that sought to remove the animal, to demand financial restitution for her damaged garden, and to secure punitive damages for what she insisted was emotional trauma. Daniel countered with affidavits, certified paperwork, and an offer to repair the lawn and replace shrubs. The county prosecutor reviewed the trespassing citation and the evidence of tampering and eventually decided to pursue a misdemeanor charge for property damage and interference with an animal enclosure. It was a rare escalation in a town where disputes usually ended in passive-aggressive notes and polite petitions. The trial drew a crowd of onlookers and a group of camera crews who had smelled a story. They filmed the courthouse steps, the neighbors in their Sunday best, and the elephant-free driveway where Tara had once grazed. Social media users tracked every development, turning legal filings into bite-sized updates and meme fodder. The comments ranged from sympathetic to scathing. Some saw Karen as a cautionary tale about obsession and entitlement. Others embraced the spectacle and turned it into a running joke about the lengths people would go to enforce imagined rules. Facing the courthouse and the court of public opinion was not easy for either party. For Karen, the proceedings became a sustained humiliation. Witnesses recounted her actions with a clarity that left little room for reinterpretation. The footage from multiple angles showed the sequence of events without dramatic editing. The loosened bolts, the swinging panel, the footprints in mud. Experts explained in careful language that stripped emotion from the facts how an elephant reacts to sudden changes at the fence and how it had no history of aggression under Daniel's care. The judge, accustomed to disputes that never made headlines, listened to the testimony and reviewed the evidence carefully. When the verdict came, it was procedural but decisive. The misdemeanor charge resulted in a fine and a requirement to attend restorative justice sessions and community service. The judge emphasized that the legal system was less interested in assigning moral weight than in correcting behavior that endangers others and disrupts public life. Karen was ordered to pay for the damaged landscaping and to cover a portion of the inspection costs. She was also temporarily barred from coming within a defined distance of the enclosure while community mediation took place. The legal outcome did not stop the viral commentary. If anything, it intensified it. The clips of the courtroom, the social posts, the heated neighborhood texts, and the late-night talk show riffs all folded into a sprawling narrative about entitlement and spectacle. Karen became an internet case study. Her name trended in unrelated corners of the web. Meanwhile, Daniel received messages from animal advocates around the country, offers to help with Tara's care, and inquiries from small film crews hoping to tell a measured story about wildlife rescue and suburban friction. What changed the tenor of the aftermath most was Tara herself. Daniel, mindful of the attention, made a difficult decision. He arranged for Tara to spend extended periods at a nearby sanctuary with specialized facilities and space to roam. It was not a permanent move, but a practical compromise. Tara would visit Maplewood on supervised, scheduled days so neighbors could see the animal responsibly, and she would spend most of her time in a setting better suited to her needs. The announcement put many minds at ease. It framed the issue in a new way, one that prioritized animal welfare over neighborhood spectacle. Karen, confronted with the tangible results of her actions, retreated inward. The cameras and commentary had made her a caricature to strangers, but the real consequence was more private. Her friendships frayed. Several neighbors who had tolerated her previous campaigns distanced themselves. Mailers and polite avoidance replaced earlier glances over hedges. The social cost of her obsession settled around her like a layer of dust. The mediation sessions required by the court were an attempt at repair rather than punishment. They brought Karen and Daniel into a structured space where facilitators guided conversation toward accountability and practical solutions. The sessions were awkward and tense, full of silences that revealed more than arguments did. Karen was forced, for the first time in weeks, to listen to the perspectives she had dismissed. Daniel, for his part, remained calm and focused on outcomes. He proposed practical measures to prevent future incidents, including a transparent inspection schedule, a neighborhood safety walk, and an educational session about animal behavior that would help dispel fear with knowledge. Slowly, the neighborhood found a new rhythm. The flyers ceased, the group chat quieted, and lawn care resumed. People resumed the small rituals that had defined Maplewood Estates before the elephant arrived. Children returned to watching Tara on scheduled days, their excitement tempered by an adult sense of boundaries. Conversations around fences became less combustible as neighbors remembered how quickly small conflicts could swell into something far larger. As for Karen, the consequences were both external and internal. Her finances had taken a hit from fines and legal fees. Her social currency had dropped. But there was also a subtler change. The ridicule that had once fueled her outrage began to erode the certainty that had made her so relentless. It did not produce overnight humility. It produced reflection. The restorative sessions, the required community service, and the tedious logistics of legal outcomes forced moments of quiet that would have been rare in her previous life. The last image of the saga that most residents kept was simple. It was late afternoon when Tara returned from the sanctuary for a supervised visit. She moved slowly along the edge of Daniel's yard, her gait unhurried and regal. Children watched from a respectful distance, their faces lit with joy. Daniel stood nearby, attentive but unostentatious. Karen watched from the other side of the street, at a distance set by the order, her figure smaller now in the open space. She did not call out. She did not protest. She only watched, and in that watching there was a moment where the absurdity of the whole confrontation was visible to her alone. The neighborhood healed in ways that were practical and mundane. The HOA adopted clearer rules, the county updated guidance on exotic animal safeguards, and Maplewood adopted a cautious pride in how it had weathered the spectacle. The internet moved on to its next obsession. Karen moved through her days with less public fury, and Daniel continued his work with animals, documenting lessons learned and continuing to advocate for safe, compassionate care. The story of the elephant in the cul-de-sac faded from trending feeds, but it remained in Maplewood history as a testament to how quickly fear and ego can escalate into real danger. It became a cautionary tale told at block parties and in HOA orientations. It was a narrative about boundaries, responsibility, and the strange ways people assert control over the lives of others. It was also, quietly, a story about an animal that had never asked to be at the center of human drama, and about the human capacity to both harm and heal. The last chapter closed not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a slow, ordinary settling. The fences stood repaired. The hedges were trimmed. And somewhere behind them, an elephant named Tara found peace in a life increasingly free of the small dramas that had once turned a quiet street into a stage. The neighborhood kept watch, a little wiser and a little more careful about the narratives it embraced. The story had ended, but the lessons stayed.